Don Stulo Venegas set down his coffee cup when his son said it, and for a long moment he said absolutely nothing at all. Welcome to the channel Historias Entre Vidas. Stay with this story to the end. It goes somewhere you won't expect. Marcos had said it the way young men say difficult things, standing in the doorway, not fully inside the room, as if he might need to retreat. He had driven 4 hours from the city for this conversation, and he had waited until after dinner to have it, which told his father everything about how frightened he was. "I'm not looking for a wife," Don Stulo said finally. "I know," Marcos said. "But she's already here." Don Stulo Ignacio Venegas was 63 years old and had been a widower for 4 years and 11 months, and he had learned, in that time, to inhabit his own silence the way a man learns to live in a house after the furniture has been rearranged, always reaching for things that were no longer where he expected them. His wife, Consuelo, had died in the spring of the 5th year of the new decade, and she had taken with her the particular warmth that had made the house in San Ram de las Piedras, Michoacán, feel like something more than walls and a roof. The house was decent. It sat on the corner of the main square, 2 stories of old stone with a corridor on the 2nd floor that looked out over the church and the avenue of ash trees. It had a kitchen large enough for a family and a sala full of furniture nobody sat in anymore, and a room upstairs that Stulo had not opened since Consuelo died. The rancho was 3 kilometers to the east, not an abandoned rancho, not a burnt-out hacienda, but a working property with cattle and corn and a young foreman named Eulogio, who ran things competently and made Stulo feel, some days, that he was no longer entirely necessary. He was not a man anyone worried about. He was healthy. He was solvent. He was respected in San Ram the way a man is respected, who has never caused trouble and has always paid his debts. He went to Mass on Sundays. He ate his meals. He sat each evening on the corridor in the wooden chair that had been Consuelo's chair, a high-backed equipole with a worn leather seat that still held, faintly, the shape of her, and he watched the square go dark and the lights come on in the houses across the way, and he was, in a fashion he did not entirely examine, profoundly alone. His neighbors were kind. That was almost worse. Doa Amparo from 3 doors down brought him tamales on feast days. The Ibarra brothers stopped to talk when they passed. Everyone was kind and everyone understood, and no one in 4 years and 11 months had ever asked him how he was, as distinct from whether he was managing. He found out the rest of the story in pieces, the way a man learns things his son has rehearsed telling him. Marcos had met the woman. Her name was Remedios Ayala, in the market of Squaro, where he had gone on business 3 months ago. She had a small table there where she sold preserved foods, jams and conservas and dried herbs, and a recipe notebook of her own making that she sold to tourists, hand-copied, with her own drawings in the margins. She was 61 years old, a widow herself. Her husband, a schoolteacher named Gabino, had died 6 years ago in a town in the Sierra, and she had no children and no property except the small room she rented behind a pottery workshop, and the knowledge of how to make things that sustained her. Marcos had bought a jar of her peach preserve and had talked to her for 20 minutes and had thought about her, apparently, for 3 months. He had gone back twice. He had told her about his father. She had, Marcos said carefully, agreed to come and be introduced. Nothing more, if Don Stulo was willing. "She's already here," Marcos had said, and she was in the house of his cousin Leticia, 2 streets over, where she had arrived that afternoon, and was, at this moment, presumably sleeping or reading or doing whatever a dignified woman of 61 does when she has agreed to a strange arrangement in a strange town and is waiting to see what comes of it. Costello sat with this for a long time. "You should have asked me," he said. I know, Marcos said. But you would have said no. Castulo could not argue with that. That night he sat in Consuelo's chair on the corridor and looked at the square for a long time. He thought about 4 years and 11 months of tamales from Doa Amparo, and conversations with the Ibarra brothers and Mass on Sundays, and the particular sound a house makes when only one person is in it. He picked up the small wooden horse that sat on the railing, a toy he had carved for Marcos when Marcos was 4, which Marcos had left behind when he went to the city, and which Castulo had kept on that railing ever since, for no reason he could name, and he turned it in his hands. He did not sleep well. In the morning he put on his good shirt and walked the 2 streets to Leticia's house. He stopped at the corner first, which was not something he had planned to do. He stood on the corner of the street for a full minute, watching the way the morning light fell across the stone facades, and a cat crossed the road, and a woman he did not recognize hung laundry in a window above. He was not a man given to hesitation. He noted the hesitation with the same flat acknowledgement with which he had noted the sound of the empty house and the shape in Consuelo's chair. And then he walked the last half-block and knocked. Remedios Ayala was in Leticia's patio when Leticia brought him through, sitting at a small table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a worn notebook open in front of her, writing something in a careful hand. She was not a large woman. She had gray hair pulled back simply, and a face that had lines in it the way Goodland has lines, from weather and work and time, not from unhappiness specifically. She wore a blouse of manta cloth with embroidery at the collar that she had done herself, he would later learn, in the long evenings of her widowhood. She looked up when he came in, and she did not stand, and she did not perform surprise. Don Stulo, she said. Doa Remedios, he said. Leticia disappeared with the speed of a woman who has been waiting for the chance. They sat across from each other in the patio, with the morning light coming in sideways, and a mockingbird making a great deal of noise in the lime tree. And there was a silence that could have been uncomfortable and was, somehow, not quite. He had expected to feel ridiculous. He had expected the particular embarrassment of a man of 63 being presented to a woman, like a boy being introduced at a party. He did not feel ridiculous. He felt instead something closer to the feeling of arriving somewhere after a long road. Not comfort, exactly, but the cessation of motion. My son told you about me, he said. He told me you make good coffee and that you don't talk much, she said. He seemed to consider both things in your favor. Stulo looked at the notebook on the table. The cover was dark with handling, the pages swollen from years of use, the kind of object that has been carried everywhere and opened daily. What are you writing? He said. A recipe, she said. I write them down as I remember them. My mother's, my grandmother's, things I'm afraid of forgetting. He looked at that. Are there many? Enough to fill 3 notebooks already, she said. This is the 4th. They talked for an hour, not about the arrangement, not directly, not yet, but about Miko Aken, and about the Sierra, and about what it is to be a person who has been in a place for many years and then finds themselves in the particular suspension of after. She had been in that suspension for 6 years. He for nearly 5. Neither of them described it as grief, exactly. They described it as a change in the quality of the air. She asked about the rancho. He told her. The cattle, the corn, the foreman Eulogio, the 3 kilometers of terracera that he drove every other morning at dawn because it was the part of his life that still required him specifically. She listened with the attention of a person who is genuinely interested, not performing interest. And she asked one question that no one had asked him in 4 years. What did he like about it? Not what it produced. What he liked. He thought about it longer than he expected to. The silence at dawn, he said, before the animals wake, when the whole place is just land and light and you can hear yourself think clearly. She nodded. She understood that. When he stood to go, he said, "Would you walk to the square tomorrow morning? There is a good coffee there." "Yes," she said. She said it without ceremony, without coyness, without the particular performance that people of their age sometimes feel obligated to put on. Just yes. What neither of them had said in that hour of careful conversation was the thing that each of them would only discover later, the thread that ran under everything. Quiet and patient, waiting, they walked to the square the next morning and the morning after that. Hestulo showed her the town, the church of San Ram with its two saints he had known since childhood, the market where the herb sellers set up before dawn, the avenue of ash trees that turned golden in October, and which Consuelo had loved. He told her about Consuelo. She told him about Gabino. They did this carefully, the way people handle old photographs, with attention, without hurry, with the understanding that the images are fragile and irreplaceable. On the second walk, she told him how Gabino had died. A sudden thing, a morning in March with no warning, and she said it plainly, the way a person says something they have said enough times that it no longer breaks them to say it, though the shape of it is still there beneath the words. He listened without filling the silence afterward. She appreciated that. On the third walk, she asked him about the room he had not opened. He looked at her. "You noticed," he said. "I notice things," she said. Not unkindly. "You don't have to tell me." "It was hers," he said. "Her sewing room. I haven't been able to do anything with it." "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "A room can stay closed." He thought about that for the rest of the walk and into the afternoon. Remedios had a recipe notebook with her every day. She set it on whatever surface was available and wrote in it between conversations or during pauses, with the easy habit of someone for whom writing is as natural as breathing. He found himself watching her write. There was something steadying about it, the particular focus of a person who knows exactly what they are doing and why. He showed her the house on the fourth day. He opened all the rooms except one. She noticed the one room he did not open and said nothing about it. In the kitchen, she looked at the comal and the clay pots and the shelf of spices and said, "May I?" And he said yes, and she made him something with the dried chiles and the tomatoes he had, and the herbs from the garden, a simple thing, a thing of 20 minutes. And they ate it at the kitchen table with tortillas and the coffee he made, and it was the first meal he had eaten in his own kitchen with another person in 4 years and 11 months. And he put that thought away before he could examine it too closely. The morning rhythm established itself without being decided. He made the coffee. She opened the notebook. They talked until the square began to fill. She helped in the kitchen when she came. He walked her back to Leticia's house each evening. Neither of them named what was happening. Naming it would have required something they were not yet ready to require of themselves. They were practical people. They moved toward the practical and let the rest follow at its own pace. The town noticed. Of course it noticed. San Ram de las Piedras was a town of 4,000 people, and it noticed everything. Doa Amparo came by on the third day. She did not say anything directly. She said, in the tone of a woman relaying neutral information, "People are talking about the woman your son brought." She paused. At her age, coming to a man's house. People wonder what she's after. Stulo looked at Doa Amparo. He had known her for 40 years. He said, "Thank you for telling me," and went back inside. The Ibarra brothers mentioned, with the studied casualness of men delivering a message they have been sent to deliver, that there were those in town who thought it was too soon. 4 years and 11 months was apparently not sufficient. There was a period, it seemed, that the town of San Rom had decided upon, though no one had written it down anywhere, and Xtulo had not met its terms. The recipe notebook sat on his kitchen table because Remedios had left it there by accident on the 5th afternoon, and he had set it carefully in the center of the table and not moved it. He looked at it that evening from the doorway. What he did not yet know, what the town of San Rom did not yet know, was that inside that notebook, between a recipe for mole negro and a recipe for pan de yema, there was a folded letter that was going to rewrite everything any of them thought they understood about who Remedios Ayala was and why she had come to this particular town in Michoacán. She came back for the notebook the next morning, and he was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the notebook open in front of him. He looked up quickly. "Forgive me," he said. "I wasn't reading the recipes." It fell open. She stood in the doorway. Then she came in and sat across from him and looked at what the notebook had fallen open to. Not a recipe page. A letter. Folded once, written in a woman's handwriting on paper that was not new. "You can read it," she said. He read it slowly. It was a letter from Consuelo. His Consuelo, written 7 years ago, before the illness, in the firm, clear handwriting he would have known anywhere. It was addressed to Remedios Ayala, by name, and it began, "My dear friend of 30 years, I am writing to you because I cannot say this to Xtulo yet." Consuelo had known Remedios from a correspondence that had begun in their youth. 2 women from different corners of Michoacán who had met at a religious retreat and had written each other letters for 30 years. Letters about their husbands and their children and their hopes and the ordinary texture of their lives. She had written this particular letter after her first diagnosis, when she had been given a number of years that had turned out to be approximately accurate. She had written, "If anything happens to me, Remedios, and if Xtulo is still alone after enough time has passed, I want you to know him. Not for me, for yourself, and for him. He is not a man who knows how to ask for what he needs. Someone needs to already be there." He read the whole letter. It took a long time because his eyes kept stopping and he kept having to start sentences again. He set it down. Across from him, Remedios watched him with the stillness of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and is now inside it. "How long have you known?" he said. His voice was even. He was a man who had spent 63 years learning to keep his voice even. "Marcos came to my table in Squaro," she said. "I don't think he knew about the letters. He just saw an old woman selling preserves and thought of his father. But when he told me your name, I knew." Xtulo looked at the letter in his hands. He looked at the handwriting he had not seen in 4 years and 11 months. He thought about the woman who had written it, who had known she was dying and had thought, in the middle of that knowledge, about what would happen to him after. About what he would need and would never know how to ask for. "She never told me," he said. "She was still there," Remedios said, gently. "She didn't need to." He looked at the wooden horse on the windowsill. He had brought it in from the corridor the night after Marcos left, without knowing why. He looked at the recipe notebook with his wife's letter tucked inside it. 30 years of friendship between 2 women he had known separately and never together. He looked at Remedios. "She chose well," he said. He meant it as a compliment to Consuelo. The way Remedios received it was something else entirely, and both of them understood that, and neither of them spoke of it directly. She stayed for coffee. They sat for a long time in the kitchen, with the morning light moving across the tile floor and the letter between them on the table. And by the time she left, the morning had become afternoon, and neither of them had noticed the transition. Marcos drove back from the city for the Sunday that came 3 weeks later, and he found his father's house with the kitchen lit and smelling of something that had been simmering since morning, and a cloth on the table he had never seen before. One of Remedios's, embroidered at the edges with small red flowers, in a style that he would later learn was her grandmother's pattern. Leticia came. The Ibarra brothers came because Castulo had invited them himself, which was a message delivered without words. Eulogio the foreman came with his wife and their 3 children, the youngest of whom was 4, and took an immediate proprietary interest in the wooden horse on the windowsill, and was told by Don Castulo himself that it was hers to hold, but not to keep, and that when she was older she could have it properly. They ate at the long kitchen table with extra chairs borrowed from the neighbors, and the food was abundant and warm, and the window was open because the kitchen was full of people, and the late afternoon light came in at the angle that makes everything look like something worth keeping. Remedios moved between the table and the stove without fuss, accepting help when it was offered, filling cups before they were empty, in the particular manner of a woman who has cooked for gatherings all her life and knows exactly how much heat a room needs. At the table's end, between the basket of tortillas and the clay pot of beans, sat the recipe notebook, worn cover, swollen pages, 30 years of her mother's handwriting and her grandmother's and her own threaded together. Marcos saw it and looked at his father. His father met his eyes and gave the smallest nod, which was everything. Doa Amparo appeared in the doorway at 6 o'clock, uninvited and entirely expected, carrying a dish of sweet bread. She looked at the table. She looked at Remedios. She looked at Stulo. Something in her expression completed a rearrangement it had been undergoing for 3 weeks, and she sat down and accepted coffee and said nothing about what people were saying, because the thing she was looking at did not require commentary. After the meal, when the younger children were chasing each other in the patio and Marcos was helping Leticia carry dishes, and the Ibarra brothers were drinking the last of the coffee, Castulo stood with Remedios on the corridor of the 2nd floor in the evening air and looked out at the square and the church and the ash trees going gold in the last light. He said, "She was right about you." Remedios said, "She was right about you too." He said nothing for a while. "Then, I would like you to stay, if you are willing." She looked at the square, at the church she had attended only 3 times now, at the people below who were beginning to know her name. The ash trees moved in the evening wind. Somewhere in the kitchen below, one of Eulogio's children laughed at something. A high, clear sound that rose through the corridor boards and hung for a moment in the October air before it dispersed. "I'll stay," she said. Sometimes God places the exact people in our path at the exact moment we are unable to ask for them ourselves. Don Stulo Venegas had spent nearly 5 years being a man who managed, who was respected, who was kind, and who was quietly disappearing inside the silence of a house that held only one person's weight. What arrived was not a replacement, and it was not a consolation. What arrived was what his wife had understood, from the other side of her illness, that he would need. Someone who already knew how to be present without explanation. Has anyone ever found a home where they least expected to find it? If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Share it with someone who has spent too long being alone in a house that was built for more. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Until the next story. And they say in San Ram de las Piedras that on Sundays, if you pass the corner house on the square around noon, you can smell whatever Doa Remedios has had on the comal since morning, and that the corridor upstairs always has 2 chairs on it now, side by side, facing the ash trees.